the government and whoever is there that we are still in the streets. And we still have a lot of other demands that they need to pay attention to.
And until they see the country's 30-year emergency law lifted and the thousands of political prisoners released, many say they will keep the pressure. Rawi Rageh, Al Jazeera, Cairo.
Well, still to come in this news hour.
I'm Jonah Hull in Johannesburg, South Africa, where we meet some of the victims of so-called corrective rape, the violent sexual abuse by men of lesbian women with the aim of turning them straight.
And also ahead, the Australian state that's still struggling to recover from the record flooding. Before those stories, though, let's head over to the United States, where Washington has blocked a UN Security Council resolution that condemns Israel's settlement building in the West Bank. Details now from Daljit Dalawal in our Washington, D.C. broadcast center. Daljit.
Taimur, thanks very much. The resolution was put forward by Palestinian leaders, and despite being backed by 14 of the 15 council members, it was defeated because the United States used its veto, a first for the Obama administration. Instead, Washington offered up a weaker, non-binding presidential statement, effectively rejecting the legitimacy of Israel's settlements. Christian Salumi has more from New York.
Will those in favor of the draft resolution...
The United States lobbied hard to stop this vote from happening. And when it did...
Those against.
They used their veto power to stop this resolution from becoming law.
The draft resolution has not been adopted.
The draft called for a halt to illegal Israeli settlements in Palestinian territories. Even though the Obama administration has repeatedly criticized Israel's settlement expansion, Ambassador Susan Rice said the resolution risked hardening the positions of both sides.
Our opposition to the resolution before this council today should therefore not be misunderstood to mean we support settlement activity. On the contrary, we reject in the strongest terms the legitimacy of continued Israeli settlement activity.
The Palestine Liberation Organization's executive committee met just hours before the Security Council. The United States tried convincing them to drop the vote, warning that there would be repercussions if it proceeded. The committee decided unanimously to move forward anyway.
We would have liked, of course, to have the Security Council adopt that draft resolution. But I think it was very clear that there is a global consensus on the content of the draft resolution.
The Security Council has successfully passed resolutions on Israeli settlements in the past. In 1967, it called on Israel to fully withdraw from occupied territories. And in 1979, it stated that settlements have, quote, no legal validity and constitute a serious obstruction to achieving peace in the Middle East. With the Arab world awash with demonstrations against leaders who are seen as more in line with the U.S. than their own people, critics of the U.S. say this vote is another sign of waning influence in the region.
They seem to be oblivious to the fact that the whole region is on fire and that their actions today are not the same as they were 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
The resolution may have failed in the Security Council, but the vote puts the United States in a very awkward position, acting against its stated opposition to Israeli settlement expansion and also against the positions of virtually every other member state here at the UN. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, the United Nations.
Well, earlier I spoke to the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and I began by asking her why the U.S. tried so hard to stop the resolution from being voted on and then vetoed it when it had so much support, including all of the other members of the Security Council.
Well, the United States' view is that our goal is and must remain the soonest possible establishment of an independent Palestinian state. And we looked at the resolution in the light of whether it would advance that goal or harden positions and set it back. As I said today in the Security Council, and as President Obama has said on many occasions, the United States strongly opposes continued Israeli settlement activity. So our objection was not on that point. On that point, we were united with the rest of the Council. The question for us was, would this resolution and its adoption advance that goal of achieving an independent Palestinian state, or cause one or both parties to dig in and make it even harder to resume the very necessary process of direct negotiations?
But what else are the Palestinians supposed to do? U.S. efforts on peacemaking have hit a brick wall. If the Palestinians can't rely on the United States, why isn't the United Nations the right place for them to go?
Because the United Nations can't create an independent state of Palestine. It won't happen. It has to be negotiated between the two parties. There are issues of borders and issues of Jerusalem and difficult issues that divide the two parties that can only be achieved through negotiations. We can have declaration after declaration, but at the end of the day, they don't create facts on the ground.
But why veto, though, a policy?
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Our aim is to achieve the goal of an independent Palestine as swiftly as possible. President Obama came to the United Nations last year and envisioned that achieving that goal by September 2011. That can only happen if the parties go back to the negotiating table, stop using declaratory attempts to divert attention, and do the tough business of negotiating.
But you say that the United States wants to create an independent Palestinian state. There isn't even a peace process right now. There aren't even peace talks. The current talks have hit a wall because of the settlements. So why can't the United States come out and say that these settlements are illegal and demand a halt to them rather than partial temporary freezes? And then perhaps there might be a possibility of the two sides getting around the table and having an honest discussion with the United States as an honest broker.
Because the United States has, since for 6 administrations, been very clear that we do not accept the legitimacy of continued settlement activity. There's no question about that. We have been clear and unequivocal. But the question is, if you simply try to make declaratory statements, will that lead to the halt of settlement activity? No. In fact, it might even encourage increased settlement activity. The goal is to achieve a viable, independent, contiguous, democratic Palestinian state.
But as a result of this veto, do you think that's what's going to happen, that there will be increased settlement activity now?
I think that there would, in fact, perhaps have been more settlement activity had the resolution been adopted.
But there is a big difference. I mean, you say that you use the word illegitimacy. There's a big difference between calling something illegitimate and calling something illegal. I mean, the illegality of the settlements has been recognized in previous resolutions. So why doesn't the Obama administration see eye to eye on this issue with the rest of the international community?
This is not the view of the Obama administration. This is the view of the United States. We do not and have not for 30 years accepted the legitimacy of Israeli settlement activity. But, and that remains our policy and our position. But, you know, we can spend time and time again debating this in the Security Council, or we can do things concretely that advance the process